Welcome to Quick Speak, the English podcast. In this episode, we're diving into a feeling that so many people experience, especially, when they're looking for a job. It's that heavy thought, nobody wants to hire me.
That phrase holds a lot of emotion, doesn't it? It's
Mm,
more than just words. It's a feeling of being overlooked, maybe, of frustration, perhaps even feeling a little lost.
absolutely. And today, our goal in this podcast is to look at this feeling from many different angles. Is it just about one person's experience, or are there bigger reasons why someone might feel this way?
Because this isn't a feeling you have alone. Many people around the world share this exact sentiment. And understanding why involves looking at more than just the individual.
Let's start right there then with the feeling itself. Nobody wants to hire me. It feels very personal, and it's a common thought for job seekers, right?
And it's important to realize this feeling often comes from more than just personal setbacks. It's connected to larger changes happening in the economy, in society, and, well, even in our own minds sometimes.
Think about history for a moment. Major times of economic difficulty like the 1970s oil crisis, the dot-com problem later on, the financial crisis in 2008, or the time during COVID, they all led to many people feeling left out of the job market. Big waves of this feeling.
And today, with the internet and social media everywhere, this feeling is just much more visible. People share their experiences online, sometimes using memes or vlogs, which really shows how widespread this is, especially now in the 2020s.
So we kind of need to think about the difference between how someone feels, that perception, and the actual situation, the objective reality. Someone might feel unwanted, but perhaps there are jobs they haven't found, or maybe skills they don't realize are valuable in new ways.
But, in some places or for certain types of work, that feeling is actually very real. Looking at information from early 2025, for example, even with jobs available overall, people in older industries or maybe specific service jobs, they truly face difficulties finding work because of big structural changes in those jobs.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this brings up interesting questions, doesn't it? Like, can feeling unwanted actually make it harder to find a job? Is the feeling more about being afraid of being told no, that fear of rejection? Or is it because the jobs available and the skills people have just don't match up anymore?
And how do the things people share online, the memes, the videos, how do they connect to bigger things like economic cycles or, say, problems with how society helps people who lose their jobs?
Framing it this way
Right.
helps us see that the distress is real, absolutely, but the reasons for it can be complex, coming from both inside us, our own feelings, and from the world outside.
Exactly.
And speaking of the world outside, a big part of this feeling comes from the economy, right?
Mhm.
You can't really understand why someone feels unwanted without looking at the big picture, the job market itself.
That's absolutely right. Global changes and new technology, things that have been happening since maybe the mid-2000s, but really getting faster recently, say from 2008 up to 2025. They've completely changed what kinds of jobs are needed. First manufacturing, then services too.
And when the economy improves after difficult times, it doesn't happen everywhere in the same way, does it? After 2008, some areas, like where many factories used to be in the U.S., the Rust Belt, for instance, didn't get those jobs back. And after COVID, online shopping and remote work grew super fast, but jobs in hotels and retail stores, they took longer to come back.
Looking at some data from the US in early 2025 is helpful here. You might see the total number of people without jobs looks low nationally, maybe around 4%. But for specific groups like people over 55, or those without a college degree, or people living in rural areas, the number is much higher. We're talking 7, 8%, sometimes even more.
And some countries in Europe also see these jobless recoveries, right? Where the economy grows on paper, productivity goes up, but companies don't hire many new people in certain jobs. It feels confusing because the big numbers look okay, but many individuals still feel like they have no chances.
This is also connected to something called job polarization. It's a trend that actually started way back in the 1990s. Basically, it means there are more jobs at the very high skill level and more jobs at the very low skill level, but fewer jobs in the middle.
Ah, the middle skill jobs are disappearing.
Sort of hollowing out, yeah. And by 2025, with new technology like AI being used more and more, this has become a bigger issue, especially for people in those middle-level office or admin roles who might feel their skills are suddenly less needed.
Okay, but what about when you hear news about labor shortages? Companies saying they can't find enough workers. How does that fit with people feeling there are no opportunities for them? It seems like a contradiction.
It does seem like one, but that disconnect often happens because companies want very specific skills, really niche things. So a job description might say entry level, but then it asks for several years of experience or certain special certificates. The jobs might be listed, yes, but the requirements make them feel impossible to reach for many people.
Got it. So understanding the big economic numbers helps us see the playing field, the context, but it doesn't fully explain that really difficult personal feeling of being told no again and again.
Exactly. That's why we need to look at the effect on a person's feelings and mind. The psychological toll, when nobody wants to hire me, is what you feel day in, day out. It causes real stress, real distress.
Losing a job or being unemployed for a long time, it affects more than just your bank account, doesn't it? It can make you question who you are, what your purpose is, maybe even how much you are worth as a person.
Absolutely. And there's data on this. Some studies from around 2023, 2024 showed that people without jobs reported feeling sad or depressed almost twice as much as people who had jobs. And this feeling can also bring a lot of shame or make people feel very alone, socially isolated.
And it can create a difficult cycle in your mind, right? Like a loop. If you get
Exactly.
rejected several times, your confidence can, well, go down. It dwindles.
Right. And this might make you perform less well when you apply for the next job or go to an interview. Maybe you seem less confident, which then, unfortunately, makes you feel even more strongly that you are unwanted. It reinforces the belief.
That sounds a bit like something called learned helplessness, where you have repeated difficult experiences, you get negative outcomes again and again, and eventually you start to feel powerless.
Precisely. It can lead to feeling like nothing you do matters, and you might even stop trying to find a job altogether, just withdraw.
And this isn't just a personal challenge, is it? The support systems. Well, help for mental health for people without jobs is often difficult to find. Or maybe there's a stigma. People feel embarrassed asking for it.
That's a big issue. Even when help is available, maybe through government programs, some people don't use it, maybe because they feel too proud or they don't quite understand how counseling could help, or they worry that needing help might make potential employers think badly of them, label them.
So dealing with this feeling requires both things you can do for yourself, like trying to think differently about rejection, maybe finding support from other people in the same situation, and bigger changes in society, like making it normal and easy to get mental health support if you are unemployed, destigmatizing it.
Definitely. Both are needed. And related to this is the whole issue of skills. Let's also talk about how quickly the skills needed for jobs are changing and how education sometimes doesn't keep up.
Yes, the skills needed are like a moving target. Because jobs are changing so fast, the traditional ways of learning maybe a four-year degree sometimes don't teach people exactly what they need for today's work, which is why we've seen so many shorter training programs, boot camps, online courses pop up over the last 10, 15 years.
But even now, in 2025, there's this strange situation where companies say they want qualified people, but job seekers feel like their training or what they know isn't being valued. Sometimes this happens because companies now ask for college degrees for jobs that didn't used to need them.
That's called degree inflation, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It puts pressure on people to get degrees that might not directly help them do the actual work.
And on the other side, people who do have specific new skills, perhaps in areas like machine learning or sustainable energy, they might find it difficult to show these skills to companies in the usual ways, like on a standard resume.
That's true. For example, a survey in 2024 showed that many hiring managers, especially for entry-level jobs, actually valued experience from real projects more than traditional degrees. But job seekers might not know how to showcase their project work effectively. They might underplay their real skills.
And while continuing to learn throughout your life, lifelong learning is obviously important. Not everyone has the same chance to do it, do they?
No, access is unequal. It can depend heavily on where you live. Someone in a big city like Berlin might easily find an online coding boot camp.
Whereas someone in a small village in, say, rural Poland might lack the fast internet or the extra money needed for that same course. There's a digital divide and a financial one.
Exactly. So this mismatch between what skills people have or can realistically get and what companies are looking for, it adds to that feeling of being unwanted. When sometimes the real problem is about access to the right learning and maybe the right networks too.
Which brings us to another really difficult aspect. For many people, the feeling nobody wants to hire me comes directly from unfair treatment. from discrimination.
Yes, that's a painful truth we have to acknowledge. For some, the door is shut simply because of bias.
Ageism is a big one. We hear about workers over 50 facing bias, maybe being told they don't fit the startup culture or they're overqualified, which can be code for too old or too expensive. A report from the European Commission in 2024 found that around 40% of people aged 55-64 believed age discrimination had prevented them from even getting interviews.
And unfair treatment based on gender still affects women, particularly when they return to work after having a baby. They might face assumptions about not being as focused on their career, or maybe they'll quit soon, or being steered towards support roles even if they're qualified for leadership in male-dominated sectors.
And then there's racial or ethnic discrimination. You mentioned a U.S. audit study from 2023.
Yes, that study sent out identical resumes but changed the names. Names that sounded typically black received about 25% fewer callbacks than those with typically white-sounding names. And similar patterns are seen in Europe for immigrants or ethnic minorities. It's a documented reality.
Also, where you went to school or who you know your background, your pedigree can make a huge difference. People with connections from prestigious schools or through family and friends often hear about jobs before they're even advertised publicly. This is the hidden job market.
Right, and that leaves others who rely on public job boards or general applications feeling like their efforts just disappear into a black hole. They don't have access to those insider networks.
And we should briefly mention that people who are part of the LGBTQ+ community might also feel they have to hide who they are during a job search, fearing that being open might lead to rejection or not being accepted in the workplace.
So when you look at all these intersecting forms of discrimination, age, gender, race, background, identity, it creates a very legitimate fear for many people that they won't get a fair chance. It makes that feeling, nobody wants to hire me, a reflection of a harsh reality they face.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to technology again, but also the rise of the gig economy. How does that feed into this?
Well, but 2025, technology like AI and robotics are doing more and more tasks that people used to do. Think about customer service chatbots handling basic questions, or software automating data entry, or even algorithms doing basic legal research or medical triage.
So skills become devalued.
Potentially, yes. A McKinsey report in 2024 estimated that maybe up to 30% of job tasks in OECD countries could be automated by 2030. Jobs heavy in admin work, retail, transport are particularly vulnerable. If your main skills are in those automatable tasks, you might feel your value decreasing.
And then there's the rise of gig work platforms like TaskRabbit or DoorDash. They promise flexibility, which sounds good.
But the reality for many is often irregular pay. Very limited benefits like health insurance or pensions, and sometimes quite low wages. You mentioned a figure earlier, maybe around $12 an hour in some cases. It's often precarious.
So this structural shift makes even experienced professionals wonder how to market themselves.
Yeah.
The market seems to favor short-term contracts over stable, full-time employment in some areas.
Exactly. And the feeling can morph from nobody wants to hire me to nobody wants to hire me full time. Or even worse, they only want to hire me if I'm willing to be disposable, easily replaced.
It's worth adding, though, that some people do embrace gig work. They like the autonomy, the flexibility, but for many others,
It feels like a forced choice between seeing their traditional skills become obsolete and accepting unstable, insecure work. That tension creates a lot of anxiety.
and the actual process of looking for a job today, it has its own set of frustrations, doesn't it? Navigating the whole maze.
Oh, definitely. Many people get incredibly frustrated sending out dozens, even hundreds of applications online and feeling like they just vanish. It feels futile.
And often that's because of applicant tracking systems, the ATS software.
Yes, over 80% of large companies use them. These systems scan resumes for specific keywords before a human ever sees them. If your resume isn't optimized for the ATS, it might get rejected automatically, even if you're perfectly qualified.
So qualified people get automated rejection emails, maybe hundreds of them, which just reinforces that belief. See, nobody wants me. It's demoralizing.
It really is. The challenge becomes this weird game. How do you write your resume so the computer likes it while also trying to bypass the system altogether through networking?
But networking has its own barriers too, right? Informal networks, alumni groups, former colleagues, industry events, they can sometimes feel exclusive or unwelcoming if you're a newcomer or from an underrepresented group. And it can be really intimidating for introverts.
Very true. And even virtual networking, like using LinkedIn or Slack channels, can sometimes feel very transactional, not very authentic. People without those existing privilege networks can feel shut out online too.
So what are some effective strategies people are using now in 2025?
Well, things like developing a strong personal brand online, doing really targeted outreach to specific companies or people instead of mass applications, and constantly learning and adapting your approach based on feedback seem to work better. Also, creating portfolios showing examples of your work, like code, designs, case studies, is increasingly important to demonstrate skills concretely. Some people even use AI simulators to practice interviews.
But here's a potential catch. Access to these newer, more effective resources often comes at a cost, doesn't it?
That's a crucial point. Resume optimization services, career coaches, premium access to job platforms, portfolio hosting sites, they often require subscriptions or fees. This creates an economic inequality in the job search itself.
So those with disposable income can afford better tools and advice, potentially improving their chances.
While others might be stuck with less effective methods like mass applications because they can't afford the premium help, this adds another layer to the feeling maybe it's not just that nobody wants to hire you, but that the modern job search process itself favors those with more financial resources.
That's really important to mention. Okay, let's also think about the role of government policies and community support. How does that safety net, or lack of one, affect how people experience this?
The social safety net and what are called active labor market policies, things like unemployment benefits, retraining programs, job placement services, they can make a huge difference in cushioning the shock of unemployment.
And these systems vary a lot between countries, right?
Absolutely. You have robust systems, like in some Scandinavian countries, offering significant retraining opportunities, strong placement support, and decent unemployment insurance. Then you contrast that with systems in, say, parts of Southern or Eastern Europe or even parts of North America where support might be much less funded or comprehensive.
You mentioned Poland earlier as an example.
Yes, in a situation like that, unemployment benefits might cover only a small fraction of a person's former wages and might only last for a few months. This can leave people feeling like they have very few options other than accepting low-paid gig work or simply giving up on finding a traditional job. It increases the pressure immensely.
What about non-governmental support? Charities, unions, community groups?
They play a vital role too. Grassroots initiatives like job clubs where people share leads, practice interview skills, and crucially provide emotional support and build morale. These can be incredibly helpful.
But are they always easy to find or access?
Often not. These initiatives are frequently underpublicized, understaffed, and underfunded. A UK charity survey in 2024 found something like 60% were operating at half capacity or less due to funding cuts. So many unemployed people who could benefit never actually connect with this kind of support.
There are also bigger policy debates happening, aren't there? Like universal basic income,
Right.
UBI.
Yes, UBI is one idea. Proponents argue it could give people breathing room for retraining, networking, or even starting a small business when they lose a job. Critics worry it might dampen the incentive to work or strain public finances.
Didn't Finland run an experiment on this?
They did,
Yeah.
from 2021 to 2023. The evidence on employment effects was mixed, but interestingly, participants did report significantly reduced stress levels and felt they had more time and energy to focus on their job search or other meaningful activities.
So the feeling nobody wants to hire me is clearly linked to whether society provides a safety net that changes how people experience and navigate unemployment. It's not just an individual problem.
Exactly. The level of support shapes the experience profoundly.
Finally, let's touch on how culture and social narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about work and unemployment, shape this feeling.
Cultural attitudes towards unemployment vary quite a bit globally. In societies often described as having a strong culture of work, like maybe Japan or South Korea, losing a job can carry a very heavy weight of shame. In other places, like Western Europe or Australia, there might be less outright shame, but a person's job is still often deeply tied to their sense of self-worth.
And social media probably amplifies these things.
Definitely. You see influencers promoting hustle culture, constantly showcasing success and productivity. Seeing this curated perfection can make someone who is struggling feel like even more of a failure, maybe prompting them to express that nobody wants to hire me, feeling online, perhaps partly as self-pity or seeking validation.
How about media portrayals in films or TV? Have they changed?
They seem to have. Early workplace comedies like The Office, for instance, didn't really engage much with unemployment itself. But later shows, maybe like High Maintenance or even parts of Ozark, often depict precarious work, economic desperation, the darker side of not having stable employment. And now you have YouTube or TikTok creators who actually chronicle their unemployment journeys.
Right. On one hand, this can create community and empathy, showing people they aren't alone. But on the other hand, it can also sometimes normalize a narrative of defeat or hopelessness.
There's also sometimes a kind of romanticization of unemployment, isn't there? The digital nomad ideal, quitting the rat race.
Yes. And while that might be a reality for a tiny few, this kind of narrative can set unrealistic expectations. It might even deter some people from accepting available, stable, but maybe less glamorous entry-level jobs, which ironically reinforces their feeling that nobody wants to hire me because they're rejecting the roles that are actually open to them.
It really highlights that complex relationship between personal aspirations, societal pressures, and the available opportunities.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of the challenges and complexities behind this feeling, but the materials you gathered also offered some hope, right? Stories of resilience, reinvention.
Yes, absolutely. It's important to end on that note of agency and adaptation. There are many stories of people who face this feeling but manage to pivot or find alternative paths.
Can you share an example?
Well, there was the example of a Midwestern factory worker in the U.S. who lost her job during layoffs. Between 2018 and 2021, she actually taught herself coding online, funding her studies through gig work. By 2024, she managed to land a junior software development role. It wasn't easy. It took years and resourcefulness.
But it shows that reinvention is possible with a growth mindset.
Exactly. And community initiatives can really help too. There was a pilot program in Lisbon, Portugal, running from 2022 to 2025. It connected experienced finance managers who were perhaps struggling to find senior roles with underemployed recent graduates.
Interesting, a kind of mentorship.
Yes, but also reverse mentorship. The experienced managers shared industry knowledge, while the graduates helped them with digital tools and new platforms. Over 300 pairs reported finding jobs or starting collaborations. It reframed that idea of intergenerational competition into collaboration.
That's a great model. And what about starting your own thing? Entrepreneurship.
That's another path. An example from Barcelona in 2023 involved a microloan program. A former hospitality manager who couldn't find stable hotel work after the pandemic used a small loan to launch her own co-working cafe. It offered her agency, a way to use her skills differently.
These examples are really powerful. They aren't just feel-good stories. They show how people can actively redefine that nobody wants to hire me narrative into something like, I'm choosing my own path, or I reinvented myself to fit the new reality.
Precisely. They demonstrate resilience and the possibility of creating opportunities.
So bringing everything together, what we've discussed today really shows that the feeling nobody wants to hire me isn't simple. It's a complex interplay of very personal struggles, big economic forces, shifts in technology, social biases, and the level of systemic support or lack thereof that exists in society.
It's a heavy feeling, rooted in both internal experiences and external realities.
It is definitely a difficult feeling and a challenging situation to be in, but as we've just heard, it doesn't have to be the end of the story for everyone. There are paths forward.
And this leads us, I think, to a final idea for you, our listeners, to think about today based on all these different factors we've explored. Considering this complex landscape, how can individuals perhaps navigate it differently? What strategies might work? And maybe more importantly, how can our societies better support those who feel left behind by the changing nature of work?
And fundamentally, what does a meaningful career or even just meaningful work look like in this new reality we're all facing?
Really important questions to reflect on.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Quick Speak, the English podcast. We really hope this discussion has been helpful for you in understanding this complex feeling and maybe giving you some useful English vocabulary and structures too.
Yes, thank you. If you found this helpful and want to continue improving your English while learning about interesting topics like this one, please do subscribe to Quick Speak wherever you get your podcasts.
And for more help with English, including vocabulary lists and maybe some exercises related to today's episode, please visit our website. You can find the link right there in the description below. Thanks for listening.